A criminal complaint was filed yesterday here in Latah County, charging the defendant, Mr. Kohberger, with 4 counts of first-degree murder, in addition to felony burglary, which involves entering the residence with the intent to commit the crime of murder.
How strong is the evidence right now against accused killer Bryan Kohberger? Criminal defense attorney and former member of Scott Peterson's legal team, Lara Yeretsian, comes on to discuss what Kohberger's lawyers need to do. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, we have focused a lot here on Bryan Kohberger's alleged crimes. The 28-year-old grad student who's been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and felony burglary for allegedly stabbing to death 4 University of Idaho students. This, of course, are the killings of 21-year-old Kaylee Gonsalves, 21-year-old Madison Mogan, 20-year-old Zana Kernodle, and 20-year-old Ethan Chapin, whose bodies were found in their off-campus rental home on November 13th. But now I want to focus on his potential defenses, because as much as was laid out in the probable cause affidavit that led to Kohberger's arrest, our next guest is going to focus on some potential holes in a future prosecution case. I'm joined right now by criminal defense attorney Lara Yeretsian, and one of the reasons that we wanted to bring Lara on is because when we talk about high-profile criminal defendants, well, Lara was part of the defense team for one of the most renowned criminal defendants in our true crime era, Scott Peterson. So she knows a thing or two about these types of cases that have gained or really generated an intense public interest. So, Lara, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Where I really want to start is, if you were representing Bryan Kohberger, how would you deal with all the publicity? And by that I mean is, in the same sense with Scott Peterson, if you rewind the clock 20 years ago, how do you convince the public, who arguably have already convicted him of saying, wait a second, let's take a step back, let's reframe the narrative? If you were representing Kohberger, how would you do that on the public scale?
Well, we know that there's a gag order in this case, so the attorney can't really be out there doing interviews or allowing her client to be interviewed because there's a gag order, right? So she's very limited. So she herself can't really do much. Maybe what can be done is what she does best, and that's be an attorney and defend him the best she can in a courtroom by bringing up many of the issues in the case, by filing motions, and obviously, everyone will be covering all those issues. If there's issues with the evidence, bring those up, and we'll go through all of that in a little bit. And also, if there's family members or cousins or people in his past who can say some great things about him, and that doesn't necessarily involve the attorney, those being interviewed would be a great thing to do. Again, the best thing she can do is investigate the case as much as possible, bring about some exonerating evidence, and file all the necessary motions, and basically put up a great fight for him in the courtroom, which will be covered anyway.
How tough is it for him to get a fair and impartial jury? Now, look, we've covered a number of high-profile cases here on Law&Crime, and we've seen trials. I'm thinking the Derek Chauvin case, a case that everybody in the United States and in abroad knew about, and yet he had what I believed, I covered it, was a fair and impartial trial. You tell me, how tough is it going to be for Mr. Kohberger to get a jury of his peers who are not somehow influenced by all the evidence yet?
It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a challenge. I don't want to say it's an impossibility, but it's pretty close to that. Anytime you have a notorious crime or an individual who has been arrested and the public opinion is truly against him, at this point, we've got people uh, all over the social media, in fact, trying to psychoanalyze him. I mean, it's not only that they've convicted him, they're even psychoanalyzing why, how, what was he thinking, and just literally like going through his entire background, finding every little thing that they can find and making a big deal out of every little thing, trying to connect it all to basically support their belief that he did this. So Jesse, that this is going to be an uphill battle. It's going to be tough. Winning the public opinion battle is not the easy part here. I think, again, as counsel, the defense counsel has to focus on the case and try and convince a jury and pick a good jury. That's the first part, picking the right jury, a jury that's not really influenced by any of this, or a jury that can keep that separate from the deliberations and truly focus on the case and make the best case possible in the case. What else can an attorney do, really?
Okay, let's focus on the legal case, the probable cause affidavit. I want to go through it with you. Now, we should make everything very clear that not only is Mr. Kohberger innocent until proven guilty, but the evidence that we currently have is going to be, I would imagine, a lot more for the prosecution when a trial ultimately comes about. There's a lot that can happen between now and then. I think they probably have more evidence that they haven't revealed. Maybe they didn't need to reveal in a probable cause affidavit. So there's more that's going to come out, I imagine. Now, the evidence that was presented in the probable cause affidavit, DNA, cell phone, the evidence about the car, the possible eyewitness identification by the surviving roommate, you had indicated, I think to Anjanette Levy, my co-host, on a previous sidebar, that there are holes in that affidavit. What are those holes?
Well, there's a lot of holes. If you start focusing on every single piece individually and try and show the weaknesses, then that's something that a defense attorney is going to do, right? Starting from the cell towers involved, where they're saying that we can show that he's been to the area at least 12 times. Well, that only shows which tower his phone used. It doesn't really specifically show you his location. He's only about, what, 8 to 10, 15 miles away from the crime scene. And he lives nearby, basically. And his phone could have picked up any one of those towers, unless they've got more. Again, there's other technology.
But let's just push on that for a second, because they said that he was near that area, near that crime scene, 12 times before, either late at night or early morning hours, like in the dead of night. Why those times? It's not like they picked him up 12 times in the middle of the afternoon at 3 o'clock. The times of when they picked it up is
Right.
what's so interesting.
The times are very interesting. But again, one of the questions I would ask as defense counsel or an investigator is there a reason for him to be there? Other than the obvious, right? Does he have a friend there? Is there someone he's visiting in the area? Or again, those hours where he's being picked up, are those uh, is it truly that because he's near the area, or he just happens to be out and his phone happened to use the cell tower? And remember, in the affidavit, they actually say that the cell tower showed that he was in the area, I believe on the 14th, it was one of the days, and that was inaccurate. They actually said it. They said in the affidavit that it was inaccurate. So it's not very reliable.
Let's focus on the cell phone data, because I think it was some of the most, damning for him. So they have cell phone data that indicates that his cell phone leaves his house at 2:47 a.m. on the night of the murders. It stops connecting to the network for whatever reason. A presumption could be that maybe he turned it off. So it's off during the times of the killings, but then comes back onto the network at 4:48 a.m. after the killings, after police say the killings happened. And we know the combination of the cell phone data and the car data, the car that's picked up on surveillance video, shows it leaving Moscow and headed back to Pullman at Washington State University. So that's, again, how do you poke holes in that?
Uh, Again, it's a little, obviously it's problematic, and I've always said it. Looking at evidence individually is very important, but we know what the prosecution is going to say, right? They're going to take all of them, put them together, and say, here, we're building a circumstantial case. Yes, there may be weaknesses in this evidence, there may be weaknesses in this one, but then when you put them all together, you can see a story and a theme, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Now, one of the things that defense can say is, wait a minute, there's a gap of maybe an hour or 2 hours from what I recall, right? Where his phone is off. And you can't really place where he is. You don't know where he is. Well, you can make the argument that he turned it off. Is that enough though? Where was he truly based on the cell site information? You've got zero evidence as far as based on the cell site information as far as where he is at the time. Yes, I know we're reading more into it. Again, this is the circumstantial part of it. What do we derive from this evidence? Was he planning this? Did he shut his phone? Or maybe he was in an area that was a dead spot. I don't know. There may be an explanation here, and again, it requires more investigation and looking into all of this evidence.
And you could say, well, what was he doing? Well, if his phone was off, they also had what appeared to be his car making initial passes by the crime scene, by this house, multiple passes, and then the car is seen leaving the area and speeding away. I think at 4:16 a.m. or something around that time. So if you put the cell phone away, the car I think is problematic. Let's talk about what could be arguably the direct evidence. So the DNA evidence. This, for me, reading the probable cause affidavit, is the strongest evidence directly to him, right? So the idea that there was this sheath that was a knife sheath was left over at the crime scene next to one of the bodies. They took a DNA material from that sheath. They took a DNA sample from one of his trash, and they were able to create a DNA profile that matched the father of the suspect, right? And, the probability is what, 90? I'll actually pull it up because I think the language of this is very important. They say, let me just pull it up here. Yeah. So they say at least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. How do you fight against that evidence, the DNA evidence?
It's again, that's not an easy one, but there's other arguments. Instead of focusing on the science of it, for example, we can focus on how did that get there? Does he have any relationship with these people? Was he at the apartment at all? Has he seen them? Has he at some point touched that sheath? Maybe at a store. Again, there's ways of explaining it, and we don't have enough evidence. I don't have enough access to some of the evidence, and I'm sure there's way more than what we've got. We nobody has ever talked about if there was any relationship between him and the individuals, the victims in this crime. So that's something to deal with. The other thing is, and this is connecting him to his dad. It could be, I'm assuming there's ways of finding the DNA on scientifically, and that's a separate part. But again, you narrow it down to, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 10,000 people who could fall into that category of a match to his father, right? It's not just him. There's more people. But again, I think the better argument is, was there a relationship? Did he happen to touch this previously? And that would be the best way to handle it.
And right now they've indicated that there's no established connection between him and the victims. It seems like a complete stranger who, we mentioned the 12 times before the cell phone, was tracking him. Was it possible that he was following them and stalking them? That's the allegation. Before I let you go, we have about a minute left. The possible eyewitness identification from the surviving roommate. She wakes up, she sees a man clad in black mask. Her description seems to match that of Kohberger. It wasn't a positive identification, but bushy eyebrows, his build, the way she describes him matches him. How strong of evidence is that? And could you poke holes in her possible testimony at a trial?
I don't think it's the strongest evidence. Bushy eyebrows is something very common, just like the vans that they were talking about is very common. That's not really IDing somebody. She's just saying he's dressed in black and his face is covered, his mouth is covered, his nose is covered. So how is she going to ID him? What are they going to do? A lineup with people with masks? I just don't see that as very strong. It's just one more little piece that the prosecution can use in their circumstantial evidence case. That's all it is. But of course, you can see the defense having a field day with that one.
Yeah, look, I mean, the idea of was she in a traumatic state? What does she exactly remember? How dark was it in the house? And the only thing I'll say to support her claims, her description of the suspect was before Kohberger was even on their radar. So it's not like she went into a room and said, "Oh, yeah, that's what I remember." Her description, she gave a description, and then it was only later on that they came up with a suspect, and it so happened that they saw matched up to that initial description. Lara Yeretsian, thank you for coming on. I'd love to get you back on to talk a little bit more about this case as it progresses.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.